Good morning and welcome to MJSA Live. We are at the MJSA Expo at the Javits in New York in the River Pavilion. If you are tuning into this locally, the show will be running until Tuesday, so you should come down and see all of the MJSA member exhibitors that are here to share tools and equipment and findings and gemstones and technology and knowledge about the business of making jewelry. So MJSA Live is our education component, and we choose to broadcast it so that our members that are in their booths can catch it on their mobile devices, and so that those of you who couldn't join us in New York can tune into the education program from at home. I'm Andrea Hill. I'm your host for this series. I'm the owner of Hill Management Group and the Works brands. So my first guest for today is Kate Peterson. Kate is the owner of Performance Concepts, one of the most respected consulting groups in the jewelry industry. Now, I know when a lot of people think about Kate, they think about diamonds and sales training, but I think about the fact that she has a PhD in organizational development, and that a lot of times when she's teaching an organization how to improve their sales performance, she's also showing them how to do a better job of running their business in every corner of the business she can influence, because she knows what makes an organization run and what causes it to break down. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great. What a great space.
It is a great space. We're in the River Pavilion at the Javits, and it is just washed with sunlight. We have windows above and on all sides, so it's a great space.
That's actually not a bad analogy to start this whole conversation. You know, that the ability to have light on everything.
Light on everything. Okay.
You know, a lot of business owners tend to think of their businesses in compartments. Things being very compartmentalized, and you look at one aspect of things and not recognize how every little thing impacts everything else. And, you know, trying to solve problems in a vacuum is the quickest way not to get a problem solved, as you know.
Fair enough. So, do you think that's one of the bigger mistakes that you see in organizations, where the information is just too siloed for them to join all the pieces together?
Yeah. I think oftentimes people that are expected to handle the action steps attached to whatever changes or developments that need to happen in a business, the people that are charged with the action steps are the ones that are oftentimes lacking information because it's not within their frame of reference. And by keeping things sort of, you know, in a retail business, for example, you know, salespeople are not necessarily privy to what goes on behind the magic curtain in the shop, you know, and they don't understand. And what they do understand is their job, which is make money, take the customer's cash and make whatever it is they need. And they don't really understand what happens behind the scenes or what the rest of that is, because that's kind of not their job. And notoriously, people on either side of that are not necessarily best known for communicating what's really going on in either area. And a business owner whose job it would be to coordinate all of that isn't necessarily upfront with all of that either.
Well, I find that a lot of times small business owners are really reluctant to be transparent. They want to hold the information closely. So what are some of the things that you do to encourage them to see the reasons and benefits for that kind of transparency?
Well, I think the first thing is getting most people to realize now that we live in a different world. All right, we live in kind of it's the glass box theory of business management. You know, we don't live behind the walls anymore, where people can't see into how things happen and how they work, whether it's consumers or employees or whatever. And generally speaking, anybody that a business owner is hiring today is going to expect that level of transparency. They're not going to tolerate less. So unless a business owner is prepared to work alone until they close their door, they're going to have to figure out how to make that leap. And you know, in many ways it's gotten better over the years, but in other ways it hasn't. You know, I remember a time not all that long ago with a business owner that had prime real estate here in New York, and a storefront, and that store was not open on Saturdays or Sundays. And I said, okay, you got millions of people walking by here every Saturday and Sunday, and this is a highly saleable brand. Why would you not want to be open on Saturdays and Sundays? And his answer was, because nobody in my family wants to work those days, and I don't want my family to have to work those days. I said, okay, so why would you not have, I don't know, a manager? I mean, this is a big volume operation. Why would you not have a manager? I don't trust anyone to handle my inventory. It's like, okay. So yeah, those are the kinds of issues, and the reason, honestly, the biggest reason this guy, and this is very, I use him as an example, but it's very symptomatic of what's going on in a lot of places. The biggest reason he couldn't trust anybody was because he didn't have any controls in place that he could rely on. So because there were no mechanical controls in place, whether it was inventory control, point of sale measures, things like that, he was afraid to let anybody else get in his vault because there was no control over what was in there. So it's systems. It's going back to systems and putting things in place that make reliable information available, so that even if he isn't a completely trusting kind of guy right out of the box, he's going to have reliable information that makes it easier for him to monitor and manage what he has.
So, and that takes us right back to the title of this first session, which is, are you running your business or is it running you? So if you're running from a place of lack of trust, lack of systems, lack of transparency, your business ends up running you, and you end up working all the hours in the business.
Exactly. Realistically, depending on the size of an operation, a business owner, a business owner who needs to grow and develop their business should have a very limited number of people who report directly to them. And those people should have people who report to them. And when I look at most of the owners in our industry, I look at companies where you have a business owner to whom everybody reports. And if that person isn't right there and on the spot and handling 20 things at a time, I noticed one of your notes the other day about adult ADD. Well, I don't believe that adult onset ADD is really the cause. I think it's the result of what goes on when people are forced to handle 40 things at once and can't focus on any one because they haven't given themselves the support structure they need to actually get the job done correctly.
I remember many years ago I went to run another company, and in my first week there, an entire department of people all showed up wearing a t-shirt that said, "We'll all know when Alan's back." And I wanted to know, what is that t-shirt about? And they said, well, there's a head of their department that knew everything. And he traveled a lot, and when he was gone, nobody knew anything.
Exactly.
So it was all in his head. So what kinds of systems? Let's talk about some of the systems that you see lacking most often when you enter a new consulting gig, for instance.
Well, in a lot of retail businesses, the systems that are lacking are not so much mechanical. For example, they may have a point of sale system in place, or an inventory management system in place. The problem is there's only one person who knows how to use it. Okay, so the system, many businesses have gotten to the point where they have the mechanics in place, but they don't have a structure of people that know what to do with it. They have one or two people, and past that, it's useless. It's just completely useless. If something goes wrong when those one or two people are not right there, they're dead in the water. And as anyone knows, whenever there is a customer involved, I don't care if it's a wholesale customer or retail customer, whenever there's a customer involved and something goes wrong, all of a sudden 10 people react to what went wrong, which does nothing but raise the anxiety level of the person on the other end of the transaction, the customer, because now they're seeing 10 people running around like bees in a hive trying to fix a problem that nobody really understands to start with. When in fact, whether it's a missing job or something that's been misplaced or whatever, there really is one person who knows what to do.
I see that a lot with inventory management systems. I see that people will have either a POS or an ERP, but they don't actually want to set up all the mechanics of getting the inventory in there correctly in the first place. For a manufacturer, it's raw materials. Yes, all the gems have to go in there. Yes, all the findings have to go in there. And they say, it's so much work. But it's so much work not to have control over your inventory and complete transparency at all times. So the building blocks are often the piece that people want to skip in those mechanics.
Exactly. And the other thing is that when people don't fully understand what they're dealing with, a business owner who buys a high-end point of sale system or inventory management system and it doesn't really completely understand how it works, they're terrified about letting other people get into it because they don't know how it works. works, and if someone else gets in there and messes something up, because the only way they know how to do it is the way they were shown once by the person who did their training. And yeah, there may be other ways to do it, but they don't know those ways, so somebody's going to get in there and mess it up. And they don't, for that reason alone, they keep an extra tight control over things that really create problems. And what that does is it totally hobbles that person. And yeah, your business starts running you very quickly because it can't survive. You can't leave. You can't, you can't not be there, because if you go on vacation for a week, God forbid, the whole place is going to blow up, or you just close the door. That's a little tricky.
And exhausting.
Yeah.
So an important thought process, just because I don't know doesn't mean somebody else doesn't know.
And the other side of that, though, is somebody else can know, but you have an obligation as a business owner to know at least enough that you can put your controls in place and you can monitor what's going on. You can't just throw it to the wind and say, well, I trust so-and-so. You have to have trust, yes. But you still have to have an eye on things in a way that makes good sense and keeps you comfortable with what's going on in your business.
Well, that is so important to point out. In any POS or ERP system that's attached to an accounting system, there's a concept called checks and balances. So the salespeople shouldn't have access to the same things as the inventory control people and vice versa. And when you're setting up a system, your accountant or CPA should participate with helping set up those checks and balances so that you do have those controls.
Right, and to explain in user-friendly terms what you need to know and how you need to find out. A lot of times the people who design the systems are probably the least sensible ones to explain how they work. Okay?
The software people.
Exactly.
Yeah, they know how the software works.
Yeah, they know how the back end works. They don't know what that means on the front line. And apart from all that, I'm going to kind of switch lanes here on you, because there's another kind of important part of this. We can talk about the inventory management, the mechanical systems, but one of the other things that I see quite often, and probably a bigger issue in most businesses, is what we affectionately refer to as the inmates running the asylum. Yeah, we see that quite often, where you can look at a business, and I know you've seen this yourself, you can look at a business and you can see that it's just out of control. There are no standards in place, or minimal standards in place. The owner assumes that everybody there does what they do just because they can read his or her mind and they know what's happening. But there really aren't any solid standards in place that define the kind of core principles for doing business. The challenge with that is that when you try to put those systems in place, when we try to put those systems in place, that's one of the things we get called for more often than anything, is standards and operating standards. Not so much mechanics, operating standards. Service standards, things of that nature. When you go to put those things in place, and the first response you get from a business owner is, oh, they'll never stand for that. Okay.
Who do they work for?
Exactly. Who signs the checks around here? You don't need, it's not about being mean, it's not about being harsh, it's not about any of that. It's about saying, look, my name's over the door of this place. And if my name's over the door, the level of service that we deliver at any level of this business is absolutely critical. And if we don't, if I don't take responsibility for articulating what those core standards are and my values that underpin those standards, then it's not okay to expect that everybody's just going to do what I expect them to do.
Well, that's part of brand responsibility as well, that, if the standards aren't clear, how do people deliver on a brand?
Exactly. And there's a huge difference between compliance and commitment, right? And a lot of the old school way of thinking, and I'm not even going to put an age on this, I think it's just old school thinking, is that people must do what I tell them to do because I am the boss and I sign their paychecks, okay? Thing is, that to me that's compliance, okay? If you ask everybody, how many people drive the speed limit consistently every time without fail, every time they get behind the wheel of their car? Very few people will say that they do. When do you drive the speed limit?
When you see the highway patrol out there.
Exactly, or when Google pops up with a speed trap ahead, little sign on your GPS. Well, that's compliance. And then what happens when you pass that speed trap? You hit the gas again and you keep moving. Okay, that's compliance. Employees behave the same way. If the only reason they're doing something is because they think it's what they have to do to get their paycheck, they're going to do it while you're watching, and they're not going to do it when you're not. Especially if it's something they don't understand or don't necessarily agree with. Okay, Now, on the other hand, if you're talking to people and they truly understand, back to that whole transparency thing, they truly understand why you do what you do. They know your why. They get it.
Reasons and benefits.
Exactly. If they understand why this is important to you. You have talented people, they could work anywhere. Why do they work for you? If they work for you because they believe what you believe, they want what you want, they share your philosophy of how you interact with the people who pay for your services or your product, then you have a different level of commitment. Then they do what they do what you need them to do, out of a commitment to the same set of values. And if you understand that difference between compliance and commitment, it's much easier to move things forward. And it's also, by the way, much easier to hire the right people, because you know what you're asking at that point.
Well, I've noticed that in organizations where the standards aren't in place, and you do often hear they're never going to do that, you have an opportunity in that moment to invite the team to participate in discussing what the right standards are to begin with, and that whole learning and commitment process evolves out of that.
Yeah, and that's usually how we start the conversation is, okay, what does every customer, again, this applies at every level of the business, whether you're a wholesaler, retailer, or anywhere down the line, what does every customer have a right to expect from us every time? If you start with that question and get that list down first, then people start to engage on that value-based level. They get what it is you're trying to go for. You know, and at the end of the day, if they go through that whole exercise and they look at that and say, yeah, that's nice, but it's not going to happen. It's like, okay, well, then you can make it not happen somewhere else, because at the end of the day, you really have to have people that are committed to this whole thing. And I got into this conversation with somebody that, you know, I respect his business acumen. We don't always see eye to eye on a lot of the ways you get there kind of things. But just recently got into this conversation about, well, you can set your standards all you want, but if people expect to hit those standards every single time, it's not realistic and it's not going to happen. I said, well, okay. But one of those favorite quotes that I like to keep hanging around me is, if you're to hit the target, you must aim above it. And if you set your standards at 90, if 90% is okay with you, you're going to be lucky to get 70. And if people think that 90% is okay because that's realistic, then why do you have a standard? Why not just set your standard lower and shoot for 100% of less? You know, it doesn't make sense. And to say that it's okay to not look for achieving those standards every time is just not acceptable.
It's kind of a cop-out. But I think the other thing that happens is people understand that there are certain standards, but they don't understand how you have to then break those standards down into specific deliverables that have measurements attached, so that people know not just verbally what a standard is about, but what that looks like in real terms.
Yeah, that's the rest of that steps. You know, what does every customer have a right to expect every time? What are the critical things we have to do to deliver on each one of those things? And then what's everybody's responsibilities for each of those? We actually have this detailed process for that, for exactly that reason. And what we end up with is, you know, every time, for every customer, every time, I will. Right. You know, and that's really the only way you can distill that down far enough to get to where you need to be. And that's, again, back to the whole idea of what a manager is responsible for. A manager has to be responsible for managing performance to those standards, and a business owner has to be responsible for managing the managers who are responsible for bringing that. If you only have 5 people that work with you, that's fine. Maybe you are the only person who's accountable to that, but you still have to have that framework in place. Otherwise, you know, you keep reinventing the same wheel every day.
So let's talk about the hiring thing, because I think it's, well, one last thing. Let's go back to the mechanics for just 1 second. So you've got your standards. This is where your systems being properly set up is absolutely critical, because now you've got systems that give you reports on how you're delivering things, so that it's actually a manageable process. What are the metrics that we've agreed to, and how visible are those metrics to us in real-time basis, not just looking back once a month when it's already too late to fix the last month.
Exactly, and coaching all the way through is important as well. You know, making sure that people know what's going on, you know, day to day and week to week. If something isn't going well, the time to fix it isn't when it all blows up. The time to fix it is when you first notice that maybe things aren't progressing as you expect. By the time if you wait long enough to fix it, till you have a serious problem on your hands, you're so busy solving the problem that you never fix the real issue.
Right.
Yeah, making sure that people know what the expectations are, that they have the tools, the systems, the mechanical systems in place, and the appropriate training. That's the other piece of it. The appropriate training to get the job done. We have this nasty habit, I think, most of us as business owners, as managers, we have this nasty habit of thinking that common sense actually exists. Those two words do not ever go together in an English sentence, by the way, just for the record. They don't. There is no such thing. If just because I understand it doesn't mean I should expect you to. And you pay people to do a job, not to read your mind.
Fair enough. So let's talk about the hiring thing. I think there's always a risk of small business owners or mid-sized business owners being committed to warm bodyism. I just need a body at a desk or at a counter. And I think it's really tempting now when labor is so scarce. But let's talk about what systems need to be in place to hire the right people that can bring commitment, not compliance, and how do you know when you're finding those people?
Well, I think the biggest step that gets skipped, I think, consistently, is identifying the specific skill sets. Well, first of all, back up. Before you can even do that, identifying the job. What is the job description? What are you hiring for?
If I see one more business owner that wants to hire somebody that's literally doing 3 pieces of 15 different jobs, and then they wonder why they can't find a person to do that job, but it's endemic.
Yep, it's that. And then worse, it's finding somebody who actually does have a little bit of skill and competency and then making them take on 20 pieces of 15 different jobs because they can. What happens in most organizations is you have a couple of people, maybe let's say you have 5 people and 3 of them are really, really competent, just all around good, they can do almost anything. Well, that's what they end up doing, almost anything. And again, from an organizational standpoint, what most people don't realize is when the specific tasks that are assigned to someone don't align with regard to thought and processing. I'm sorry, I don't want to get too crazy with this, but our brains work in certain patterns. Okay, we process information in certain ways. Most of us are wired to process one way or another. Either we process in great big circles and spheres, and great salespeople, by the way, do this. You just kind of pull stuff out of thin air and you form this pattern. Well, most
they don't necessarily make good accountants.
There you go. They are not linear thinkers at all. So if you need somebody who can think in linear patterns, that is not your person. Well, the problem is that when someone displays a certain level of competency, particularly in a smaller, closely held business, what happens is that person can discipline themselves to do different things, even though it's not natural, even though it's not comfortable. The challenge is that you lose about 30 to 40% of productivity every single time, because every time that person has to flip between one type of task and another type of task, the ramp-up time that it takes to really get themselves back to where they need to be, and then back to the other task again, is massive. And business owners don't understand how someone can go from being so good to being inefficient.
This is where multitasking is so damaging. People who are good at multitasking treat it as like an incredible attribute, but I like them to think about it in terms of a manufacturing environment, machine turnover. You don't want to be turning over a machine every 14 parts. And our brains have the same difficulty with turnover, so we've got to stop treating multitasking as a business value and create business environments where people can actually focus and achieve some efficiency and really get things done.
Yeah, I worked with a business at one point where the same person was the marketing manager and the inventory manager. Now, there are no 2 jobs that are more different. This person was actually pretty good until the business grew to the point where one person doing one of those jobs was probably not enough. But here's the other side of it. When you get people who have grown with the business and taken on those levels of responsibility, part of the problem you run into is that when you need them to let go of certain areas of responsibility so you can restructure in that way, they are hell-bent on not doing it. They are not going to let go. They grew it to this point. They can continue to do more. We tend to start, when we watch business growth, people tend to start as generalists. Everybody does a little bit of everything because that's what 5 people do when they're running a big business. Well, as you grow and as that business gets bigger and bigger, you can't just keep doing more of the same. And back to the hiring thing, you can't find generalists anymore. You're not going to hire more. You keep looking for people who can do what you do, and they don't exist.
So lucky finds.
Yeah, and they've probably worked for somebody else for a whole bunch of years, so you have that whole set of problems you got to worry about. But the situation you run into is you have to start to separate things out, and in order to grow further, you need specialists and not generalists. So back to the whole defining jobs and defining skill sets that go with each job. You know, what do you really need this person to do? We've gotten to the point where we try to make this as simple as we can by just having two sections on a piece of paper. Must be, and fill in, and you must complete the sentence grammatically correctly. Must be what? And that's a characteristic. And then the second half of that is must be able to. And those are skills. So we create skill and characteristic profiles.
Two columns, must be and must be able to.
And that, what do you need in that position? Who does this person need to be? Characteristics, and what do you need them to do? The characteristics ones tend to be pretty consistent across positions in the business because they're values based. The must be able to are the skill based. If I want you to be a marketing manager, I don't need you to be able to run my POS system necessarily or my inventory management system. Okay, that's not a skill that fits. Okay, but I do need you to be pretty talented when it comes to graphic layouts. Okay, so you see, it starts to be a lot more organized than people like it to be.
And do you find that people? I sometimes stumble into business owners that think they like a personality type. That's what they're comfortable with. And so maybe the personality type they're comfortable with is a person who's more likely to be like a salesperson. But then when they're interviewing for accountants or inventory control people, that personality type isn't as comfortable to them. So then they're less likely to be attracted to those candidates.
Exactly. And they end up making hiring mistakes. And the other problem is that they're more likely to make hiring mistakes when they wait too long. When they wait until they desperately need somebody because they can't go another day, they're going to have a mutiny on their hands if they don't have the right person in the right spot. So they make a hiring mistake that way. But you're right, they gravitate toward people who are more like them in many ways. And that could go to either side. The other situation is that they gravitate to people who seem to be a good personality fit with the team. Not a bad thing, except for the fact that when you're interviewing somebody, you're not likely to see whether or not they're going to be a good fit with the team if you're the only one talking to them.
Well, and people forget, the person in control in a job interview is not the interviewer, it's the interviewee. So you need to give them enough time with you and talking to actually start to get a sense of that person.
You also have to ask the right questions. The kinds of questions, the traditional, typical interview questions, really don't get people very far. You have to ask the questions that are going to get you the information about how they process information, how they really think. One of our favorite questions, the opening question on any interview we have our clients do is, tell me the story of Andrea. How did you get to where you are today? And then shut up and listen. Because it's interesting. What happens with that particular question is people answer it in one of two ways. And it's very clear. When the first time you ask this question in an interview, you will see this. Very clear delineation. One type of person will tell you everything that's ever happened to them and been done to them. And the other type of person will tell you everything they've chosen to do and have made happen. And you chuckle and smile, but I got to tell you, the first time you ask that question, you will get those answers. And immediately, you got to decide: do I want the victim in this role, or do I want somebody who's going to take charge? And by the way, is somebody who takes charge of their own environment going to intimidate me? Because if that's the case, then I'm going to go back to the victim, and we're going to have all kinds of problems.
So we're delineating the roles very clearly before we hire. We're hiring before the need is intense, which is scary for a lot of business owners because they don't want to make the commitment to payroll for fear that well, this is where sales planning and marketing planning and all come in. You're growing into an intentional plan, not an accidental one. And we're interviewing for the right personalities and skill sets based on those definitions.
Yeah, Personally, I'm not a big fan of the word personality as much as I am processing, which I know it sounds kind of like a fine line delineation, But personality is more of a psychological thing. Information processing is more hard skill based. How do I think? Am I that linear thinker? If I ask you, another one of our favorite questions, if I give you 5 envelopes and tell you that they're all numbered 1 to 5, and there's a task inside of each one, and I'm going to give you 2 hours to get all 5 tasks done. I want you to describe your process. What will you do from the minute I put those on the table? That's going to tell me whether you are a linear processor. Well, I'm going to open number 1 and get it done, and I'm going to open number 2 and get it done, or I'm going to open all 5, put them in order from easiest to most difficult, and I'm going to start with the most difficult, and that's a linear processor.
And they're both legitimate. Absolutely both legitimate.
Absolutely. There is no right answer, except for as it relates to the job I'm trying to fill. So I'm looking for processing. I'm not necessarily looking for whether or not I like you or you're going to be a good fit with Susie who's in accounting. I'm looking for how you process information first, and then secondarily, value basis and comfort with the team. And the best way to ensure the second part of that is to make sure I'm not the only person talking to you.
Group interviews, they're so important.
Just conversation.
So you've defined the job, you've hired some great people. Let's talk about training and the role that training needs to play in an organization if you want to be running the organization and not having the organization running you.
Yeah, I think the number of businesses that don't have any sort of initial onboarding terrifies me sometimes when I see what all is really out there. They don't have it. And every person, the assumption in our industry is if you've worked for somewhere else in the industry, you have some basic level of knowledge that I can rely on, and that is 100% not true. It just isn't. You don't know. Context is everything. So just because somebody was very successful working for XYZ company where there was a significant amount of structure does not mean that they're going to be successful for you if you don't have that structure in place. I don't care how much they know about product or about the system or about whatever. If they don't have the support structure that they're used to, they may not be successful. So that's one thing. As far as training goes, we're adamant about the fact that every single employee should go through a basic orientation, a basic onboarding and orientation program with your company. And if they know a lot and they've been around a lot, that's fine. They'll get through it faster. But they still have to go through it. And then from there, training specific to the role and responsibility you have in place. That initial orientation, by the way, should give them enough background that they understand what's going on throughout the building. They understand what's happening in various departments. They spend a half a day sitting on a chair being quiet behind the jeweler so they can see what happens and what goes on back there. They spend a day in accounting. They spend part of the time with each person. And if you only have 5 people, that's okay. They spend time with each person. That's part of that transparency and the understanding of how the organization works.
And I like what you're pointing out about sitting down behind them. People seem to think that if you put all the people in one room, they will naturally understand what the other people are doing. But if they're busy themselves, people don't actually tap into what the other people in the environment are doing. So giving them time to job shadow and observe is such a critical part of that orientation.
Yeah, understanding how everything fits together. They really need to see how the end product, if you keep focused on the end product, whatever that is for your business, if your focus is on what has to happen at the end of the day, and everybody understands their role in getting to that point, and they understand everyone else's role in getting to that point, they're a lot less likely to do things that throw the whole thing off the rails somewhere along the line. Now, I learned that lesson a couple of years back when I was working with a company outside of the jewelry industry that was a very complex and huge operation that had everything. Everything they did was tied and hooked to their reputation for amazing, outrageous service. It was in the clothing industry. And they had to deliver. And every person, right down the line, from the sales consultant who had to understand why they couldn't promise this, or this, to the people in alterations who needed to understand why things had to be done the way they had to be done because of what the salesperson was committing to. All of that had to work together. So building that orientation program really was an eye-opener for me to say, oh, wait a minute, here, we got to start. There has to be ways to make that work and to structure it. Don't just assume that, I can't just assume that if you are my shop manager and I send this new sales rep to you for a day, with nothing other than make sure she knows what's going on here, that you're going to know what to do. I have to send her to you, and you have to have a checklist. You have to have a detailed protocol for the things that you need to teach her, and she has to have that same checklist to hold you accountable for what she needs to learn. It's really accountability on both parts.
Absolutely. For a long time, business was run in very military hierarchical structures. And the benefit of that was you had a lot of control. The downside of that is what we call throw it over the wall management. So one department does their thing and they throw it over the wall to the other one, and then that department does their thing, and they don't even share the same metrics. And so what happens is you have an organization with all of the arrows pointing in different directions. So what you're describing is creating that integrated environment so all the arrows can be in alignment.
Exactly. And so that you don't have people running around saying, yeah, but. Those two words are the death of most organizations. Yeah, but. Which basically is, well, I know you're telling me to do it like this, but the last person told me to do it like this. Which way is right? And it's the only way to fix that. When two people have different opinions on how to get things done, take it to the business owner, who all of a sudden just inherited a problem again. One of the most famous time management articles ever was Daniel Goleman's article called "The Monkey on the Back."
Yep.
And it's old, so only those of us who are old really understand this. But "The Monkey on the Back" it's still one of the best articles out there, and you can find a reprint of it. I strongly suggest you do, because every time I say, you know what, I'll get back to you on that, I just put another monkey on my back. And the biggest rule for a business owner is monkeys must be fed or shot. That's it. You either have to continue to nurture or you got to get rid of it. So the better thing to do is just avoid putting them on your back to start with and let people be responsible for what they need to be responsible for.
Well, and that takes us back to standards and shared standards, and a lot of times we'll see that different department heads, and in our industry we see this a lot in family-owned businesses, where nobody wants a family fight, so they just kind of go down their own paths. But, I know a big part of my job, I'm guessing it's a big part of your job, is you get the family in the room and everybody agrees on the standards, because until that happens, everybody that's working for the family members ends up getting contrary direction, and that drives employees crazy.
It does, and it forces them to camp out with loyalties.
Yes.
That create all kinds of problems. The fights get bigger, and the fights is probably a strong word, but the tensions get bigger when the people around the individual family members in particular establish loyalties and set up camp.
And it's honestly not that hard to get people to one place of agreement when you start talking about the issues as issues related to business goals. Now, if you're a family member that owns a business and the family members are at odds about the business goals, that's a harder thing to fix. But it has to be fixed, or nobody's goals get met.
Right. Exactly. That's got to be resolved first, and that goes back to the whole accountability and management. People can't, employees can't function well when they have to choose who they're going to listen to. And even if you think everybody's on the same page, if there's differences in approach, differences in procedure, and people are forced to choose, they don't want to do that, and they shouldn't have to do that.
No, they shouldn't. It's not fair to them. So onboarding, we make sure we onboard these good employees we found because we've used a good hiring process, and we get them through their onboarding process. How long do you think, or how long do you tell your clients to expect it to take for an employee to really come up to speed?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question. I hate to say it depends, but it depends. I mean, the reality is that they have to look at where the person came from, what their background is, how much base knowledge they have, and how much support they're being given along the way, and what the job is as well. You'd like to think that the more complex jobs that require a little bit more technical training and skill are the ones in which you place people that have some of that background, but that's not always the case. It could take up to a year. It could take just a month. It really just depends on the person and the structure that they have to work with. What their background is and what they have to work with. But back to that whole background thing again, never assume. I don't care if somebody's been doing a job for 20 years. I can't afford to assume that they've been doing the job for 20 years, or whether they've been doing the job for 20 years, or if they've been doing the job for 1 year 20 times over, because that's more often the case. And they haven't learned much in that time. So, don't be afraid to use practical measurements. When you decide you're going to hire somebody, first couple days maybe should be spent, after the onboarding, should be spent with them showing you what they know. Showing, not telling. Because I can tell you anything. Man, I can be pretty damn convincing, especially if I have a sales background. But they got to show you what they know. Whether it's on the bench, bench tests make a lot of sense. But so do sales tests. So, if I'm hiring somebody to work in my office, to work in inventory management, I'm going to make them put together an Excel sheet with pivot tables that tell me what I need to know at any given moment based on what our operation looks like. If they can't do that, I don't care if they tell me that they know how to use Excel.
Well, and it's funny because I've been challenged on that where people would say, but we have an ERP system. No, I still want to know that a senior inventory control person can extract the data and manage it. Not because I want to know how much they know about Excel, it could be Google Sheets, I don't care, but because I want to know how they think.
Exactly. And how, if they're going to be able to provide what I need. At the end of the day, I need to know that they can provide what I need. There's a certain level of analysis that has to come with that position, if that's the position I'm hiring for. I need to know how their analytical skills look. And should I test that before I finalize a hire? Yeah. But just in case you don't, that's why we have things like, probationary periods. 30 days to show me what you know is usually enough. If it's not a skilled position and you're just starting and you're just, you're a new hire and I just really like your energy and I like your ability to learn, great. I'll give you a little bit longer than that because I haven't really defined what I need you to know yet. But anything longer than maybe 60 or even 90 days is going to be pushing it. Probationary periods, by the way, are not a legal issue because it doesn't matter.
Almost every place is at will at this point.
Yeah, every state's at will. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't be sued for wrongful termination. That's the thing. Everybody's misled into thinking that, we are an at-will state, so I can fire you if I want to. No. If there's anything discriminatory about what you're doing, you're still going to get nailed.
And it gets really expensive, so do a good job of hiring in the first place because you're going to pay for it. And I know that in our mid-market sized organizations, we often see a 90-day probationary period, whereas with smaller businesses, we often see 30. But whether your probationary period is 30, 60, or 90 days, it should be clearly defined for the person coming in. They should know this is what you're expected to know at the end of 30 days. This is what's expected at the end of 60 days. And there should be regular communication with them to make sure they're making progress and having the resources to make the progress.
Yeah, that's usually one of my first questions. I'll have somebody call and say, they're coming up on their 90 days, and I think I probably should let them go. Okay. Tell me about the conversations you've had so far. I really haven't had time. Okay. Are we detecting a problem here? If you haven't coached along the way, you haven't had those conversations and say, okay, wait, this is what's working and this is what's not, it's not okay to assume that they should have done better or could have done better. Maybe they could have. And the other thing I think most folks don't realize is the cost associated with that 90 days. Not just to the payroll cost, but the cost of having to go through the whole process again. And one other thing that I think is really critical with regard to this right now is that most businesses are aware of how important it is to pay attention to those Google reviews. Pay attention to those customer reviews. Pay attention to what people are saying about you because that's how most people are finding out whether or not they want to do business with you. Okay. What most business owners don't realize is that employees, current and former employees, are posting reviews about you too.
On Glassdoor.
On Indeed.
Yes, that's right.
That's the biggest one. Glassdoor, Indeed, even on Google, but there are ways that for employees to review you. So the next time you place an ad, if you're not getting any response to that ad, first thing you need to do is take a look and see what's buried in there because the people who are applying for jobs are looking at those things. And they're looking for the person who said, I thought I was getting into this, and this, but boy, that is the most dysfunctional company on the planet. That's happening. Or, they said they were very transparent and they were this and that, but boy, it was like a lockdown in there. And I can't tell you some of the things that I've read. But people need to be aware of that, and you need to take a look and see what people are saying about you, because especially if you're in a smaller market, it doesn't take long before the employee pool to be totally poisoned, basically.
Well, and I've had business owners come to me and say, you've got to show us how to get this review off Glassdoor. And I'm like, I can't do that, but I can show you how to not have that review end up there again.
Right. Right.
And it's about organizational management.
Exactly. Management, period. Yeah. Managing the team that you have and managing the business that you have rather than having it run you into the ground.
Now, beyond the onboarding period, and particularly today, this is different than 25, 30 years ago. It's different than 15 years ago. What people do want to see on Glassdoor or Indeed is the organization's commitment to ongoing training and development. So let's talk about that. How important is that today, and what do organizations need to do?
It's critical, especially in smaller businesses, because many people are kind of the mind that young people, especially coming into the workforce, are of the mind that if I'm going to go to work for a company, there has to be a ladder. There has to be some way that I advance my career. Well, interestingly, what smaller businesses have that bigger businesses cannot provide is the ability to advance your career by simply getting better and better and better and better at what you love to do. You don't necessarily have to change jobs to get ahead.
And not everyone wants a management job.
Yeah, they in many cases they think they do because that's the next step. Well, okay, and by the way, for people who have that situation where you have somebody who wants to know what their next step is, they want to be a manager. Okay, what do you love most about what you do now? And then you listen. What do you not like about what you do now? And you listen. And 9 times out of 10, the not like list is everything having to do with management.
I read an article, and I wish I could quote the name of the author, but it was about 6 months ago. She referred to the path of today's employees not being the ladder, but the river. Making it possible to keep learning more and investing in your professional development and your personal development and how to really get that intellectual or creative fulfillment.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that goes back to the whole idea of defining jobs, define the roles, define the responsibilities. If you're hiring me to be the best salesperson, then help me get better and better and better at what I do, get better at communication. Help me understand what's changing in the consumer landscape month to month and year to year. There are plenty of things. If my job is to be a gemologist, every day I should be looking for, you should be helping me find information on what's the latest and the newest. Where does that investment need to be? If I'm an accountant, what's the latest development in software? What are all the things that are happening in my particular area? Now, if I am an accountant who wants to know more about gemstones, well, great, then that's something I can learn as well. Is it going to help me in accounting? Maybe.
My cross-training is hugely beneficial for organizations, even if people aren't going to directly apply it.
Right. It has more to do, again, with thought process. It has to do with analytics. It has to do with how people think about things and stimulating their brain to simply learn more. It keeps them happier at doing what they do if they understand more about what the net result is.
We strongly encourage all business owners to have a training budget. I know that my employees spend 10% of their time in ongoing professional development. And that's our budget. And it's expensive, but it's expensive not to keep up with all the changes that are going on in the world right now as well. And by the way, that means I spend at least 10% of my time taking the same certification courses, doing the same training, transparently continuing my professional development, because if you're not leading it, you can't expect everybody else to do it.
I think, that makes a very good point in terms of how you determine how you're going to spend that time in that budget. The best way to find out what you still need to know, what I still need to know, is ask the people around me what I still need to know. What am I missing here? If I'm going to spend time and effort learning something new, what do you need me to learn to do better that I'm not doing now?
Which allows us to support our employees in the way that leadership should.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, using that word, leadership. There's a massive difference between management and leadership. And, most of us have had more than one experience in our lives where we've had people we worked with that were managers that were totally ineffective leaders. And we've also, most of us have also known people who were fabulous leaders that had nothing whatsoever to do with management. So finding that ideal combination is really what makes a difference. And people gravitate toward leadership far more than they do toward management.
Well, the good news is both of those things can be taught and learned if you're committed to learning either. And in big corporate spaces, there was always this argument, well, a leader is this one and a manager is that one. But the reality is, especially in the small to mid-sized markets, the jewelry industry is all over the world. If you're a business owner, you have to commit to learning how to be both a leader and a manager. And that's not personality driven. There are fantastic leaders that are introverts, and there are terrible leaders that are charismatic. But these are learned skills that need to be committed to.
Absolutely. And again, as a business owner, understand that people will follow, people will take direction from a manager who they follow as a leader. And the biggest difference, by the way, between managers and leaders is that managers have compulsory followers. You got to kind of do what the manager says. Leaders have voluntary followers.
Or back to what you talked about at the beginning, commitment versus compliance.
Exactly. You know, being able to, the other question we get all the time is, well, how do I motivate people? You don't. You can't motivate anyone to do anything. Sorry, you're not that strong, you're not that good, okay? People motivate themselves.
That's right.
All right, you don't have the ability to get someone to do something because they want to do it. They have to do it because they want to do it on their choice.
Well, and their choice will be based on understanding the reasons and benefits for things, seeing the metrics that express what success looks like, based on standards that have been defined and explained. I mean, it all comes back to the transparency and structure that's necessary.
Yeah, there's nothing more disheartening to someone than to think that they're doing a good job, only to find out that they're not because the target moved. Or they weren't clear on what the real expectation was. You know, I thought I was doing okay, now all of a sudden you want me to do something different. You know, that's very disheartening, and that's one good way to lose good people.
Well, we took that right in a circle. So you started with transparency, and we kind of ended up back on transparency. So let's recap the important points for running your business instead of your business running you. Transparency,
trust in the people around you, which is based on accountability and measurement and standards.
And hiring the right people based on doing the work of defining the roles.
Yeah, structuring the roles that make sense and hiring the right people for those roles, and then making sure they have the right tools and the right training to get that job done. And then ensuring that measurement standards are clear and consistent.
And then committing to ongoing learning so you can continuously implement the exciting new things that lets people go on that river rather than trying to climb a management ladder that may or may not exist.
Perfect.
Yay.
I like that.
We should start a business.
We probably should, yeah. Wait. Yeah. I think I see our first couple of employees, right?
Lori would love to do anything but work for herself right now. Her manager's really difficult. Puts a lot on her.
Yes. Okay, yes.
All right. Well, that wraps our first session for Live from MJSA Expo. I want to thank Kate Peterson, my first guest today. She's the owner of Performance Concepts and an expert in organizational design, and I think the perfect way to kick off our first session of this expo.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for being here.